I joined a Roll20 game. The DM said that he runs multiple games off the same group, which explains the 40 or so people in the group. Oh my god. Game day comes after a week or so. There are 14 players in Discord, some with their mics, some not, some with echo so bad the DM manually mutes them until it's their turn. 1 hour into the game, we finally get past introductions. When I bring up the time, he says, "Don't worry, it's slotted for 7 hours." I stuck around just to see the moving train crash, only to be told I'm not fitting in. 30 minutes later by one of the players because I refused to ERP in the Discord server. I got voted off like it's Survivor. The DM abstained from the vote. The DM sends me a message saying sorry and asked if I wanted to join one of his other games. No. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever and whenever you are. I am Rune from Rune'sGuild, and this is another episode of RPG Horror Stories. So before we get into even longer of an introduction, let's go ahead and roll some posts. So, I've always had a really vested interest in fantasy games my entire life, but somehow D&D just kind of slipped my radar, mostly because I didn't have actual friends until high school. That gets into where this story goes, because my school started a gaming club and I was all over that stuff. Fast forward a bit, and it's me and roughly 5 to 6 other people that are pretty new to the game sitting at the table and working with our DM. We were playing 5th edition, which was pretty easy to grasp in my case. I already knew what I wanted to play because I had spent years working on a fantasy character outside of D&D that fit the mold very well. Ended up playing a half-elf Oath of the Ancients paladin whose other half was orc, not human. Never came up in gameplay, just an aesthetic and lore choice. That's cool. Things go fine for a while and I enjoy the experience, but the DM becomes increasingly frustrated with my character and begins to constantly question every action I make or punish me for it. For example, in this one RP scene, I started before we took off on another quest that my character would do the stereotypical knight pointing his sword on a horse pose. But the DM made my character fall off his horse into the mud. On another occasion, the DM was shocked at how high my hit bonus was for my attack and straight up accused me of cheating. I explained in detail how I got my modifiers, and the DM was very confused that the proficiency bonus was applied to the attacks. Then I said that I was no longer allowed to do that. Fine, whatever, I go along with it because I enjoy the new friends I've made, and I knew coming into this that D&D was kinda at the DM's mercy for better or worse. That is, until we're in combat again and I go for my extra attack, just leveled up, and pump smites into it. At this point the DM brings everything to a halt and demands an explanation for how I did everything. Once again I gave him a rundown on my 2 attacks and how smites work to show I'm not cheating. But the DM is just over it now. He ends the combat half-heartedly saying, "Congratulations," sorry, "Congratulations, you won! You killed all the goblins!" I left the club shortly after this and started playing D&D online over Discord, which is most assuredly a better experience. Didn't really bother to keep in touch or contact with the DM, but I still know quite a few of the players from back then and stay in touch. Thankfully, D&D wasn't completely ruined for me, but I just don't understand stuff like this. I feel bad for anyone that has played with this DM and had the game completely ruined for them because a guy couldn't bother looking in the player's handbook instead of arguing about the basic mechanics of attacking. Him accusing me of cheating is actually delirious because all he had to do was open one of the 5-player handbooks at the table to prove himself wrong. But instead, he chose to lash out and act like a child because of the toxic perception of how the game is supposed to run. I wonder if on this subreddit, a few years ago when this happened, I wonder if the DM wrote a horror story about the player cheating and like adding too much stuff in. I wonder if that's in the past somewhere, if we could find that just in history. Beyond that, I mean, that's actually a pretty cool flavor text for a character, a half-elf, half-orc. That's actually pretty gnarly. Obviously, like, it doesn't come with the gameplay, just aesthetic choices. I just think it's really cool. It reminds me of this character I'm planning to play soon. It's a sorcerer who, everything's the exact same, just the sort of aesthetic choice for his spells. Any elemental spell is actually electric damage instead of, like, a fireball would be like a lightning ball. Nothing's different apart from that. I don't know, it's just an interesting lore choice. On top of that, I don't understand how people can DM but not know what they're doing. Like, I didn't have any idea what I was doing when I was first DMing, but I was I at least knew the idea of the rule of cool. And like, if something cool is happening, don't be a jerk about it. Just, hey, that's pretty cool. don't have your knight fall off a horse when they've probably been on a horse, and don't just, I don't know, if something doesn't make sense, somebody explains it, like, oh, that's cool, instead of, no, you can't add your proficiency bonus to your attack modifier anymore. That's just not allowed. You're not allowed to hit things. 90% sure this DM just wanted to kill his players on a power trip. Like 90%, I'm gonna go 99%. Certain that this DM was just sort of the kind who wants to kill his players just to do it, just cause I'm the DM, I can do it. Anyways, next post. My GM had created a Pokemon TTRPG homebrew system that she wanted to test out. To be honest, it was pretty broken and complicated, but we were all down to spend the day gaming with friends anyway, so it didn't matter much to us. There were no humans in the setting. Pokemon had their own society going, and were basically fully sentient. We were all on a big island with only one major city, and the campaign began with us being selected by lottery to become the next city guard. Or, at least that's what we were told. In practice, it meant that we had to stay outside the city and protect it from attackers, but we also weren't allowed back inside, which, obviously there's something wrong there. But we all just shrug and play along for the sake of the DM's story revealed down the line, which you all pretty much guessed by the end of session 1. Our group was being led by a DMPC, a female Arcanine, that was leveled way higher than us, but still sent out to do dangerous missions. We were all fully aware that this character was there to pull our asses out of the fire if we messed up. But the DM was scaling combat for our characters, so it hardly ever came to that. The one time it did, my character, a Shinx, had a lot of bad luck with rolls. Arcanine swooped in and saved me and protected me until the danger was gone. After this event, I roleplayed my characters as having a deep admiration for the Arcanine. Not so much a crush, but think of how a kid fawns over someone they deem as their hero. Cute, wholesome, a little awkward, but not problematic. Now, fast forward. After discovering that there's a bunch of shadow Pokemon looking to kill everyone on the island and training to take them down, the aforementioned big reveal happens. The city that had us lose a lottery were actually expelling us due to a lack of resources. However, the Arcanine, having learned of the shadow Pokemon threat, scooped us up with the lie that we were now city guard, so she had people to help her repel that threat, even though she herself was in exile as well. Our party is understandably pissed that we'd been lied to all this time, and now having leveled up, the 5 of us are able to take the Arcanine in a fight. We win, but don't kill her, just tie her up and ask her questions about our situation. Of course, my character, having idolized the Arcanine, acts hurt, and just learned that their hero had been lying to them this entire time. And then, in the middle of our interrogation, I read ahead, I'm so sorry, of the interrogation of her, and my character asking why she had to lie to us, the edgelord speaks up. Well, since you feel that it's okay to use people, I think it's only fair to let Shinx use you. Oh my god. The table is dead silent as we process the fact that one of our friends just suggested that my character should revenge screw the Arcanine. The edgelord immediately realizes he went too far and backpedals, apologizing profusely. But the damage is done. I have my character leave the scene because the wholesome relationship was completely soured by this joke, and the session ends there. Out of session, the party just decides that there's literally no one on this island that we want to help, and they just build a raft to sail away from the shadow Pokemon infected island. End of campaign. Like, why can't we escape this? Why is this always a theme that people need to bring in? I don't understand. It's a fantasy world. Not every fantasy story has to have this. You can have a good dark setting without it. And I get that this wasn't the intention of it, but like, why is this guy bringing it up? Why? 100% this guy does naughty things to pictures of Pokemon. I guarantee it. 100% guarantee it. I don't understand why people have to bring this up all the time. I don't understand why this has to be in any dark setting. I don't understand why it's like fantasy and this are tied together. It's like people think, oh, there's elves in this world, time to get my essay on. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not going to keep talking about this. Next post. This is our obligatory longer post for the episode. So let's start. There are 8 people in this story. Me, the DM, my partner, Andy, Jill, my partner's sister, Tim, my partner's brother-in-law, Vivian, my partner's mom, and Paul, my partner's brother. Mo and Curly, the partner's nephews, ages 10 and 10 months respectively. Oh my goodness. Playing with the whole family here. A little background. My partner Andy recently wanted to move to be near their sister Jill, brother-in-law Tim, and new nephew Curly. My partner's mom, Vivian, also lives in the area. We all live not far from each other. For all the upsides, I have no family or friends of my own here, so I feel like I'm trying very hard with every interaction with my partner's family to be impressive, interesting, funny, etc. So much so that I generally end up being none of those things. Andy's family has welcomed me, and they can be a little judgmental, and Vivian's mood can be pretty unpredictable, all of which kicks up my anxiety. Still, I'm always looking for openings to integrate more into the family, as Andy and I are in for the long haul, and blending families is a long game. Mistake number 1. How hard could it be? I had recently tried out Dungeon Crawl Classics number 67, Sailors on the Star of the Sea, with 2 veterans, including Andy, and 3 newcomers, including Jill and Tim. The level 0 funnel was a blast, and everyone was really into it. So, when brother Paul and older nephew Mo were coming to town, a rare event, I had to thought, these people are all nerds. I've been playing with D&D for 3 years on and off and wanted to try to DM. DCC was aces. I bet I could put something together and we could all play and make a really good memory. This was my first mistake. Mistake number 2. Lost Minds of Phandelver with new players, a couple even to the concept of fantasy TTRPGs and no session 0. Yeah, sounds great. Why not? Okay, part of why I wanted to DM something is because I like to feel creative, and when it's for a purpose, I really get into it. World building is absolutely my jam. Flavor and detail, writing in new styles, love it. I know I have a perfectionist tendency, which usually means I make a simple thing way too complicated. Even when it pays off, it's not worth the ulcer. I decided to not do that to myself, so I bought a D&D starter set with Lost Minds of Phandelver, a Jillian die, and a pre-filled character sheets. Easy. Except, maybe the beginning of Lost Minds of Phandelver is a little too quick for brand new players with no session 0, and oh, wow, DM's Guild has a bunch of supplemental stuff, including a better intro for brand new players. Oh, and someone retweeted a cool module where your characters meet at a funeral. Maybe I could integrate that. What about a simplified character sheets, standees, maps? One thing led to another, and suddenly I had just completely written a beginning adventure, complete with its own map, graciously made by Andy. I was really proud of it. I even wrote a whole intro to the concept of D&D that I plan to read to a rapt audience. This expectation, to be clear, was ludicrous. Mistake number 3. Maybe we shouldn't play if everyone's fighting and the matriarch is mad at all of us. Oh no, what happened? Andy's family can get along, but Vivian's emotions run high most of the time, but especially when everyone's all together. She was barely talking to anyone and constantly upset before we were to play D&D. I began to get really nervous, and I heavily suggested that we just not do it. It's not something we can play when the vibe is off. Paul, so D&D is like mushrooms. Yeah. I also have an uneven history with Vivian, and I was very scared to be a source of authority and make rulings for her. To prepare, I asked Andy, Jill, and Tim to help me explain things and soften the game for her. But I was still really nervous about being in an authority position with my mother-in-law, and I went in terrified. Mistake number 4. Infinity. What could possibly go wrong? Answer: almost everything. Well, certainly everything that I could have predicted but didn't, in order. Oh no. The table was too small. All of the paper standees made the table so crowded that we could barely roll out the map and barely had any room for character sheets. My beautifully scripted introduction was constantly interrupted by Mo, who couldn't get over naming his character Buttocksit. He asked me if he could change the name, and I said yes, thinking he would change it to something less giggle-worthy. The name change? Butt-Tox. Curly was feeling cranky and suffering from a little separation anxiety. Anytime he wasn't held, he was crying. Anytime he was held, he was babbling up a storm. So ultimately, I was sandwiched between 2 bundles of rambunctiousness. I knew about railroading, and I thought I had thought of how to get them to the funeral for their dear friend, Gudrun Rockseeker, but no sooner had they entered Neverwinter than they were outside my preparation. I stonewalled them to get them to the funeral, which they were fine with. Vivian surprisingly got into it. I mean, making impassioned speeches, buying everyone drinks at the tavern, passionately defending her mission, smiling, acting, and smacking up a storm. I was so shocked that I barely heard what she was saying. but Andy and Jill told me that her speeches were actually her usual speeches to them, thinly veiled and fantasyfied. And in retrospect, Andy and Jill both watched Vivian with the most unreadable expressions on their faces. I felt pretty gross for facilitating that kind of interaction. Felt like we'd locked all the doors, and then I stupidly let her in through the fantasy RPG window. No one knew how to investigate, and while I encouraged investigating at the funeral to find out that Gundren Rockseeker was not dead after all, but the funeral was a scam to convince people he was dead, everyone kind of gave up on it pretty quickly, and Tim basically went murder hobo and tried to kill all of these half-assed scammers at the funeral. When Slidar Hallwinter broke into the funeral, thinking the whole thing was real and rending clothes, gnashing teeth, drunk, howling, this was my clip from the Academy Awards. Mo picked up his D20 and said, "This guy's lying. I roll for insight," which was truly the funniest part of the game besides buttocks, master talks, and formal settings. The baby wouldn't stop crying and was passed around the table. Whoever was holding him wasn't paying attention, and Paul, who I was most hoping would engage, especially to make memories with Mo, checked out really early. I tried to manage all 6 PCs and 7 NPCs in battle, and accidentally left Tim out of the initiative order, and he never got to get into a fight. Gundren Rockseeker broke into his own funeral, declaring the whole thing was a sham, and a few people said, "Oh wow, this is complicated." Instead of carrying on into the actual first act of Minds of Phandelver, I stopped the game and said, "Okay, that's your first adventure." And everyone said, "Wow, thank you," which was nice, but I could barely hear it through my ear-splitting headache. As soon as the game was over, Vivian went back to not talking to anyone and freezing everyone out, which was utterly bizarre. The upside? Mo actually wanted to play more immediately and wanted to find people to play with as soon as he got back home. At least for him, it was a memorable experience. By contrast, new dad and chief curly holder Tim later said jokingly, "I think I may have blacked out during that game." Anyway, this was my first experience DMing D&D. I keep dreaming about getting to try again, but see above. No friends. Oh man, this reminds me of the first time that I tried to DM. I actually made an entire world. I used a world generator to make it, but I actually came up with like lore for everything, and my party were starting in a small port city, and we had no idea how to play the game. My friend Brenton was actually a sentient piece of bread that wore a necklace to stay like an actual like person, and his name was Breadloin the Fourth. I had somebody played a Yeti that was stupid, named himself Harambe, and he just played this Yeti, just really dumb. We didn't know what character sheets were, so I made like some stats based on like Fallout, including like the luck stat. And on top of that, like they were sailing, they were gonna go somewhere, and I had like a campaign planned out for like what was gonna happen. But then I didn't know what railroading was at the time. I didn't know how to keep them on track or anything, so they just like immediately stole a boat and sailed the opposite direction. And it makes me think like sometimes the best times to play are when you don't know what you're doing at all and the entire thing's just up for grabs. Obviously, if you buy a module, just run the module. Don't make your own thing, the whole thing, however you want to do it. Like, if you're gonna homebrew something, go balls to the wall. But if you're doing a module, just run the module, because that's been play tested, especially if you have new players and you're not entirely sure how they're gonna do. Just run the module that you buy instead of making up your own entire introduction. Maybe that's just me. But looks like that will do it for this episode of RPG Horror Stories. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, leave a like, leave a comment, leave a subscription. If you didn't like it, sorry, that's my bad, I guess. If you have your own RPG Horror Stories, leave them in the comments below. If you don't, good job. If you can't think of any comments to leave at all, just leave a comment saying Gundren Rockseeker, because the legend broke into his own funeral, so that he deserves to be mentioned down there. And that is everything. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next episode. Bye.